for a presentation.
Item number 1 is a communication from the mayor and a draft ordinance relative to the consolidation of the Community Development Department and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment under authority granted by Section 514 of the Los Angeles City Charter. This item has also been referred to the Housing, Community, and Economic Development Committee.
Thank you. Now, just by way of very brief introduction, as I think everyone here knows, the mayor had proposed consolidation of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment with CDD as part of the budget process. The council agreed to hold off on a budget reallocation of the resources of done to CDD for at least a 3-month period, for the specific reason that we wanted to have the opportunity to consider the policy implications of this in this committee. So this will be the first of what will likely be several committee meetings that we'll have to discuss the proposed consolidation, discuss what its policy implications are, whether there might be other more effective options, and to actually have an opportunity for public input on the policy. So with that, I'd like to ask the mayor's office to come up and make a presentation on the proposal as it currently stands. Welcome.
Thank you, Councilman. And hello, Councilman Zion as well.
Good afternoon.
Aaron Gross, Mayor Villaraigosa's office. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, the mayor introduced a proposal to merge the Community Development Department and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. And I just kind of wanted to come to committee and give you a sense and give the public a sense of where the mayor is coming from, what his thoughts were as far as this proposal. As you know, 10 years ago, the voters approved a new charter that changed a lot in the way the city was done. One of the components of this charter was to create a Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and the Board of Neighborhood Empowerment Commissioners. We are 10 years later, and we now have a citywide system, an amazing citywide system with neighborhood councils all over the city. I think we're up to 91 neighborhood councils that do phenomenal work in every community in this city. In 2006, I believe there were 86 neighborhood councils, and now there are 91 neighborhood councils. So as you see, over the past 4 years, the number of neighborhood councils that have been certified has been dwindling. So the roles and the goals and the needs of neighborhood councils have changed over the past 10 years. When the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment was created and the BONC was created, there was first a need to create this citywide system. There was a need to help certify all these neighborhood councils all over the city. They did an excellent job, and now we've got, as I said, we've got the neighborhood councils all over the city. But as the certifications have come to a trickle, the needs have changed. The services that neighborhood councils need and need to be provided have changed significantly. There's been controllers' audits. There was a neighborhood council review commission, and a lot of work has been done over the past couple of years to see kind of what the next step is as far as neighborhood councils and the neighborhood council system. There have been a number of issues that have been identified, areas that need work. And fortunately, the city council, the mayor, the commission, neighborhood councils themselves have been working hard to solve some of these problems. If you go to the Dunn website now, it's been revamped. There's some amazing things available there. There are trainings that are available. There's best practices that are available. There's much more information. It's much more interactive, and that's one of the things that that we saw in some of the recommendations from the audits by the controller, by by many of the comments from neighborhood councils, by the NCRC report, which is great. Unfortunately, as this revamp and this rebirth of this department was going on, there was sort of a perfect storm that came upon this department in the last year or two. The perfect storm starts with the economy. You know, this is the worst economic downturn this country and the city has seen since the Great Depression, which has has required the city council and the mayor and all city departments have to reevaluate the way the government's being done and how we provide services and how we evaluate our priorities as far as services that we provide to the general public. So the economy was one part of this perfect storm. Another part of this perfect storm was the recent controller's audit that took a very strong look into neighborhood councils, specifically into the neighborhood council funding program. Saw some things wrong. They identified a couple of situations where bad things happened, but more where bad things have happened or there was misuse of money. But more than the specific instances, the recent controller's audit spoke to the lack of accountability and the lack of controls, and the need for some of those to be placed upon neighborhood councils. And it really didn't paint neighborhood councils in the light that they deserve to be painted in. It didn't speak to all the amazing things it's done with the public dollar with neighborhood councils, but it did bring up some very important products of work that need to be accomplished, regardless of how we move forward as the next step of neighborhood empowerment within the city. And the last piece of the perfect storm was that this department is almost entirely made up of a union, work staff that is a union that was not part of recent agreements with the city. They weren't protected by some of the agreements that the city and city council made, so they were not as protected as far as their jobs. And so when the city council and the mayor and all the city departments came together to try to figure out how to tackle this economic crisis, it was clear that departments were going to have to shrink. It was clear that departments were going to have to reevaluate their services. It was clear that streamlining was going to have to happen. There's been a lot of talk in the city in the last few years about zero-based budgeting and about core functions, and that was one of the things that we discussed when crafting the mayor's budget and also crafting this proposal. What are the core functions of the city? What are the core functions of this department? What services need to be provided so neighborhood empowerment can thrive in this city? We've seen that sort of core functions and consolidation and focus of resources in areas of need in a number of different places. We've seen it with LAPD, with CompStat, and putting the cops on the dots. We've seen it with the gang program, the gang funding, kind of focusing it in areas of higher need. We've seen it with the Family Development Network. We've seen it with even in Public Works with Street Services, the micropaver system, identifying the highest need in the city and focusing our resources where the highest need exists. Unfortunately, because of all of these things, the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment was hit a number of ways. So the mayor, with his proposal, was looking at different departments and wanted to match up strengths with weaknesses. And there was always a question of whether it's a standalone department or whether you put it together with another department. Part of the reasoning behind the proposal to consolidate as opposed to as a standalone department is that, as you've seen over the last number of years, and actually every year, smaller departments are always under fire. They're always considered for big cuts. And looking at a department that was going to shrink just out of necessity for budgetary reasons, the fear in the mayor's office was that a minimized Department of Neighborhood Empowerment would be under fire every year. In addition to that, the resources that we use in a large department help with every component. In the council office, in the mayor's office, when a big project comes up, everybody kind of drops what they're doing and comes together and works on that particular issue. If you have a small department, there are not other resources that where people can drop what they're doing and help out. And so that was another thought of a consolidation. Instead of a standalone, the Community Development Department is a giant department, and having those sorts of resources and that kind of backup was something that was looked upon favorably as far as this proposal.
And I don't mean to take you off the train of your thought. We'll come back to this, but CDD is a major department with doing a lot of work right now. So without enhancement of their staff, what advantage is there in going to a larger department that is already overworked and fully funded by federal and state grant funding and so forth in achieving those kinds of meeting the needs of the ebbs and flows of workflow if they're already at maximum workload right now.
Well, that speaks to the strengths and weaknesses that I mentioned before. You're absolutely right. CDD is overworked, does an amazing job, but has a full plate. But when looking at what some of the strengths and weaknesses are of the neighborhood empowerment services in the city, or neighborhood empowerment services in the city, and looking at some of the strengths and weaknesses of CDD, that there seems to be a pretty good, at least in my opinion, in the mayor's opinion, a pretty good connection between the community development department and neighborhood empowerment. The community development department does a lot of outreach to populations, to all populations in the city, and actually many populations, socioeconomic status, renters versus homeowners, a lot of different diversities that even the neighborhood review, NCRC, mentioned as things that need populations that need more outreach, that need more diversity in all neighborhood councils. And CDD, I think, would be a good partner in doing some of these things. CDD also does a lot of things that the neighborhood councils, I think, already do, but also neighborhood councils, if they don't do them, they should be doing. Some examples are, neighborhood councils have talked about doing job fairs and have done, like for instance, a health fair. The Empowerment Congress Central Area Neighborhood Development Council have done a health fair, and CDD does a lot of work with health organizations, with communities that need services of this type. CDD does a lot of training and education, as capacity building and job, job skills that the neighborhood councils have expressed an interest in doing, and neighborhood councils already do to some extent. There are they work with day laborer programs, and that's an example of something neighborhood councils already do. Recently, we had a day of service in West LA, and the West LA Neighborhood Council, to their credit, was an amazing help. It has a very good relationship with the day laborers in West LA, and they ended up bringing some volunteers from the day laborers to help out. And that's something CDD has a relationship with the day laborer systems as well. So there are connections already that are informal that a consolidation of this sort would help to formalize. Another example is CDD does a lot of work with businesses to create jobs, summer jobs, and just jobs in general. And there are I think it's $25 million that's coming in from the county to create summer jobs. And one of the things that we need right now are businesses to step up and say, I really need I need someone to come and help out. I can provide a job or two, and it's really neighborhood councils that are closest to the community that may be able to help CDD out in identifying these businesses, and having that connection, I think, would be an advantage to both neighborhood councils and to the community development department. CDD deals with helping kids with homework and access to computers. They help find after-school programs and summer youth programs. They help with performing arts and media technology classes, organize sports programs. These are all things that are important to neighborhood councils. These are all things that are important to our communities. They do cultural and recreational programs. They work with the gang and youth development. They deal with anger management. They provide services for anger management. You've probably seen in some neighborhood councils things can get heated, and maybe it makes sense for those who deal with anger management to be able to provide these services. Currently, as we've already, I heard grumble. I just meant various services that can be provided that CDD has a history of providing. Along those lines, where was I? I lost my train of thought. Along those lines, we've gone through a couple of other consolidations in the city. The Human Relations Commission is now a part of the Community Development Department. There's already a relationship there. The Human Relations Commission provides some services to neighborhood councils. So putting the department in the same department as another department that is part of this is another connection that's already in place. There's another thing that CDD does is they help people improve their English skills. And one of the programs that you'll hear from one of the neighborhood council leaders behind me is that her neighborhood council, I think in South LA, has done an amazing bilingual program, and connecting what CDD does to what this neighborhood council does, and what other neighborhood councils can do with providing language programs, would be, in the mayor's office opinion, beneficial to both CDD and to neighborhood councils. What else? While putting this proposal together, it was important to look at, as I mentioned, the strengths and the weaknesses of both departments. Somewhat recently, the NCRC, the Neighborhood Council Review Commission, put out did an amazing body of work and put together all these recommendations, many of which are addressed or can be addressed in such a partnership between neighborhood empowerment and community development. Recommendation number, and I'll give you just a couple of examples. Recommendation number 18 talks about the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment being reorganized to highlight community organizing and technical assistance in aspects of its staff, and that's something that CDD would be able to help do. Recommendation number 4 talks about providing methods of providing formal information to neighborhood councils that can be upgraded, simplified, and made more user-friendly. They talk about the need for cross-cultural communication training between neighborhood councils and city employees. They talk about, they make recommendations about the Human Relations Commission. They make recommendations talking about asset mapping of neighborhood organizations and other vital community assets. A lot of what the Community Development Department does is deal with local nonprofits, and I think it's unfortunate at this point that there's not that much, at least as far as I know, not that much connection between the nonprofits that CDD works with and the work that neighborhood councils do, but there should be. These are nonprofits that work in every community in the city, and maybe it makes sense, and in the mayor's office opinion, it makes sense to put them together and have them work together, have more synergies between community development and community empowerment, grassroots organizing. Let me see if there's a couple of others on here. Anyway, there's been a number of reports of things that need to be improved or at least looked at, revamped, and I think that the mayor's proposal is hoping to do this, to begin this process of creating some of these fixes that need to happen to support, as I mentioned, the amazing work that's already being done. So that's the base of where this comes from. I know there's a couple of specific fixes that I think we'll probably talk about through the questions, but that's really where the basis of this thought behind putting these two vibrant community-based departments together. The need with the budget and the strengths of both of these departments.
Right. So those are two large categories of advantages that the mayor's office is proposing to achieve by this. One is budgetary, and one is creating more effective operations.
Absolutely.
So let's talk first on the budgetary side of it briefly, if we could. What is the anticipated cost savings that the mayor would expect to realize from this consolidation?
It's a good question, and I would love to have someone from the CAO's office up to help me answer the question. I believe.
Is there a representative of the CAO who can talk about that?
I mean, I believe the proposal was somewhere between a savings of $1.5 million to $2 million. And remember, we're also in this proposal, we're going from a department that was 43 authorized positions down to 18 authorized positions. So that accounts for some of the cost savings, but again, the CAO can probably speak more specifically. I'm sorry, I probably should have warned you I was going to ask. Okay, so the report from the mayor's office is $1.5 million annually, but I think that I think that some of that would have to, as far as the specific numbers, would have to be worked out. There's questions of space leasing. There's questions of whether we end up with an executive director. But at least our understanding is that the cost savings would be about $1.5 million.
Right. So I wanted to talk to you about both of those examples and other components of this anticipated savings, because I've seen the reference to $1.5 million a number of times in the mayor's letter and in the CAO's report, I think. But I haven't really seen a breakdown of how that number would be derived. I know, for example, the current space rental that Dunn has is about $250,000 a year, I think, for that rental space. Is that right?
Sounds about right.
And so one component of that $1.5 million in savings, I assume, is that there would no longer be a need to rent that space. Is that right? Does that go into the $1.5 million?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that would be part of it. I think the bulk. The bulk, I think, would be staff costs.
Well, yeah, and we'll go through
Okay.
those. But on the space issue, first of all, has there been a determination on whether or not the city can avoid the rental obligations for the existing lease on that space, number one? And number two, has a determination been made if the current Dunn personnel are moved over into the CDD office? Have we determined whether there's room to put them in those offices in order to realize that savings? Have those
Yes.
analyses been made?
Yes. There's one. I believe we've come to the understanding that we can get out of current lease situations. There is Dunn is currently in 2 locations, I believe, and I can also. I think the general manager is here, can speak to some of this, can speak to most of this. But they're in 2 locations. One's on 2nd Street, one's on 1st Street. The 1st Street property is actually city owned. And so the proposal would either have some of the Dunn staff in the 1st Street location and some of them in the Garland building where CDD is, or have all of the staff over where CDD is. And I think that remains to be seen. But there is adequate office space to house a department that is currently pictured or proposed as 18 staff.
Okay. So now with the reduction in number of personnel from, I think, 30...
It was 43 authorized.
Okay, down to 18 in the current proposal. That would be, those reductions would be proposed whether there were consolidation or whether it remained a standalone
Yes and no.
department.
Yes and no. If it were a standalone department, there's certain needs of a standalone department that would probably increase the number of staff requirements. One would be a general manager and administrative assistants to that general manager, but also if you have to craft your own budget, that takes a significant amount of staff time as well. So there are some cost savings between going from a standalone to a department that has some of those services.
But on the general manager front, there wouldn't be a general manager since there wouldn't be a separate department, but there is a function that's assumed that there will be for the director or head of neighborhood empowerment.
Yes.
That would then be in CDD. So there would be a position that would move over that would have to still be a fully supported, but also it would be a full-time position devoted to neighborhood empowerment, which would be the functional equivalent, would it not, of a general manager?
Yes.
Okay. So if there's a cost savings there, it would be that you're paying a little lower salary to someone who doesn't have the title of general manager, I guess.
For that component of the cost savings, yes.
Okay.
And I can't. I have to admit, I don't know the nuts and bolts, the dollars and cents specifically, but I can make sure we have some of that information the next time we meet.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful because if to the extent that budget savings are driving policy, then I want to have a high level of confidence that the budget savings are real and not theoretical. So I think that it will be necessary. If we don't have that delineation of those savings at this point, it certainly will be necessary to have that in short order before I think we can we can consider supporting a policy that's driven by that justification.
Okay. Fair enough.
I'm going to have more on this, but while I'm looking, Mr. Zine, do you want to?
When does that
Yeah.
lease expire on the sites they currently have?
I'm not sure when it expires. I believe it was I think it was a multi-year lease, but to end the lease, which I believe we found we can do, would I believe be the end of July, and I
End
would
of this July?
end of this July. But we can. I think the general manager, the current general manager of Dunn, may know more specifically than I do.
And you mentioned executive director.
Yeah.
What I look at this with $1.5 million savings, elimination of 20 positions. If we have an executive director managing the operation, how does that differ from the general manager who's managing the position of Dunn? Are we just changing titles?
Yes and no. As I mentioned when we started, the needs of neighborhood councils are different, so I think that the support that currently exists in Dunn in the proposal shifts. The functionality of an executive director would be essentially the functionality of the current general manager. But because the needs of neighborhood councils have changed, some of the functions of a general manager may fall to some of the other staff. There's been, as I mentioned, the consolidation of resources and focusing on areas of need. There's a lot of need in areas that are not well represented by neighborhood councils, and so I think a lot of that work.
For example.
Areas of need, just areas that are underrepresented by neighborhood councils. Either that, for instance, Palms in West LA, I think they couldn't find enough people to run for office, and I think they maybe had a dozen or 24 people come to vote, and that would be an area of need, somewhere where Dunn staff could focus their efforts, as opposed to other areas that have high functioning neighborhood councils that don't necessarily need as much. Hand-holding in some of the things that they do. In addition, the mayor's proposal reflects some of the discussions that the mayor's office has had with neighborhood council advocates from all over the city, where because there are strengths in neighborhood councils, there are resources within neighborhood councils that have not been fully tapped into. You'll hear some neighborhood council advocates speak later about mentorship programs that are going to be that can be fully run by current neighborhood council volunteers. You'll hear about best practices that neighborhood councils can explain. For instance, I currently serve as the mayor's West LA area director, so you hear a bunch of my examples will come from West Los Angeles. I apologize that my examples are not as diverse as they should be. But there are, for instance, some of the outreach that's done by neighborhood councils. The West LA Neighborhood Council has very good relationships with local businesses. Local businesses to the point where flyers for events and flyers for meetings are put in Best Buy bags as customers leave. And that's a way, that's outreach that's just not something that Dunn was going to be able to do. They don't have those connections to the local communities. So not only are communities strong and able to do that sort of thing, but this is a best practice. This is a best practice that this neighborhood council and other neighborhood councils should be able to disseminate to the rest of the neighborhood council system to hopefully help with the outreach and hopefully help with some of the other needs of neighborhood councils. In addition to the consolidated staff that'll be a clearinghouse of information, instead of going to every neighborhood council meeting, Dunn staff will be probably based in an office with a phone and a desk to be able to answer questions. I don't know how much help. I don't know how much help necessarily a staff member of Dunn provides at a neighborhood council, especially a high-functioning neighborhood council meeting, sitting there and listening to the deliberations, other than learning the amazing projects that neighborhood councils are working on. But some of the problems they've got and some of the trainings they need or some of the issues that come up, we can focus that effort on those neighborhood councils that may need it more and not have to spend the staff time that actually goes out to every meeting. I don't know if the council office staff, when I was council office staff, we tried to go to as many neighborhood council meetings as possible, but it wasn't possible to hit all of them, and it really was not the best use of resources to have a council staff at every neighborhood council meeting. So that's another kind of base of where we think the consolidation and focus of resources may be able to be part of this cost savings and part of this streamlined providing of neighborhood empowerment services.
And neighborhood councils done was a $10 million budget. Was it a $10 million budget?
It's about $3 million.
Pardon me?
About $3 million.
What it was originally? You spent $3 million the last 3 years?
Yeah, their operating budget's around $3 million. You might be looking at the neighborhood council funding program budget.
The whole done with the neighborhood councils with the 45,000 or 50,000, whatever the case.
That's about $10 million a year.
Okay, and we're shaving off 1.5 million
Right.
of $10 million total.
Correct.
I don't see that as a substantial savings for what you're going to get. I mean, what are we really getting for $1.5 million? How much of it is real money? How much of it is fluff money? When you really think about the support function, whether it's there or not. And I was a charter commissioner that helped develop neighborhood councils. It wasn't supposed to be cookie cutter. They were supposed to be unique. They were supposed to blend with whatever community. And one may have more participation than others. One may have activities at schools. One may, you mentioned Best Buy. Some parts of the city don't have a Best Buy.
True.
Some parts of the city don't have those
But
stores.
They partner with supermarkets as well. I mean,
Okay.
any local business.
Well, whatever community wants to participate with the vendors, the business people. When I thought that they were going to do this blend, I thought they were going to take a substantial savings and help the budget that's obviously struggling for survival. But for me, $1.5 million, and when you really start shaving it down, the 20 people are probably going to be assigned to other departments, right? Anybody getting a pink slip?
Yes.
How many?
I don't know. I have to differ.
See, I'd like to find out how many are actually getting pink slip versus getting assigned to special funds or something else. And I've had my issues with Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and how they've operated. But as far as neighborhood councils, the ones I have in my district, other than not turning some of the reports in as timely as they should have, they've seemed to run pretty smooth. And I think if you look at the city as a whole, other than some problems that occurred in some areas, it's run pretty well. But it's been 10 years. So 10 years is more than an experiment. 10 years is more than a time to try it out. And when I'm looking at the cost savings, I thought it'd be a substantial cost savings, more than what we're seeing here. And the fact is, when they're up and running, and they're up and running in a successful fashion, whether it's in my district or Mr. Corrigan's district or some other district, it's kind of like you call the police when you need them, you call the fire department when you need them. They're there as a support function, but not as a mother hen, because they've gone through that from San Pedro, Wilmington, to the San Fernando Valley, where they've been established, where they know what they're doing, where they have the governing boards. So, I mean, number one, I got real issues with how much money they say they're savings versus what they're doing to demolish a department, to see if that's going to be beneficial to everyone's benefit.
Fair enough. And I think you're right. As I mentioned, there are areas that need very little service from a department, but there are areas of the city that need a lot. And there are new neighborhood councils. I think there have been 2 or 3 that were certified in the last few months. There's a few that are on the docket.
But not many more coming around.
True, but there are neighborhood councils that have been existing for a number of years that have been kind of fledgling, where the resources should be focused, where there are higher needs.
But if I may, that's, I think, an important context for this discussion about the budget, because when we're talking about $1.5 million worth of savings, a couple of things. One, we still need to do a lot more work in evaluating whether that is a real number, and I think as our discussion just suggested. But number two, I think you're absolutely right that this is the moment, this is a transitional moment for the neighborhood council movement. We're kind of at the adolescence of neighborhood council's development. We're 10 years in. I think the original plan was within 20 years there would be a vibrant and effective neighborhood council movement throughout the city. So we're at the halfway point. This is the turning point where we have to decide how to make this movement the most effective it can be. So you're right that there are different services that will be needed, some services that are no longer as needed. But you could look at the converse, too, and say, as we're moving forward, that means we're going to be needing more of a different kind of service in order to maximize the potential of this movement.
Absolutely.
So from a purely budgetary point of view, then, it might be that whatever we save with this hand, we're going to have to spend more with the other hand in order to get the most effective neighborhood council movement we can. Right now, with what I'm seeing before me so far, we're taking a roll of the dice in whether or not a new structure will effectively fulfill the mission of servicing neighborhood councils, and possibly endangering the vitality of over 1,000 volunteer community leaders and all that they leverage into city services for our communities, to possibly maybe save something like $1.5 million. And to me, that's a risk that at this point I'm not prepared to take. But I think we have much more work to do, both on a budgetary and a policy standpoint on this. But more specifically, and this is further to Mr. Zine's question, the proposal calls for elimination of 25 positions, including 5 that are currently vacant and 20 that are currently filled. So I don't know if anyone would be prepared to delineate that further as to what it is that those 20 people who are currently working for neighborhood councils who are going to be eliminated. What are the services that they're now providing that are going to be lost?
Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to, well, actually, can I come back? I want to respond very briefly.
Sure, and Mr. Kim is here as well, so if we need to have Mr. Kim come up to talk about the specific positions, we can do that. But first, respond on the broader point first.
Just you were talking about the cost savings, and one thing I wanted to point out is that we do, as we looked at all the departments one by one, we also need to keep in mind that we talking about percentages. I mean, while this department, while $1.5 million is not a significant chunk of change when we're looking at a $500 million deficit, as the City Council was looking at a few months ago. This is a significant cost savings in the budget that was. So I think that needs to. I would think that there is some significance in that. We're talking about over a 10% cut in this department's budget, where were just a straight cut. And then you had asked.
Well, no, just to that point, you're absolutely right. It's very significant in the degree of the cut to the neighborhood empowerment mission.
But overall
yes,
savings
that's true.
Is not.
The overall savings to the city is not so great compared to what might be lost in the terms of the vitality that comes with this movement. I think that was Mr. Zine's point. Yes.
Can I comment on the 20 filled positions?
Yes,
2 of them
please.
are vacant through ERIP, and about 12 of them have transferred to other city departments. Mostly we have CDD, housing, DWP lacers. So what you're doing is you're really just shifting the cost of those positions from the general fund to these other departments. So there are real general fund savings that are involved here. Most of these positions are vacant. These people have transferred out of the department.
Yeah, and I've assumed, and I think that we've established that the bulk of the proposed savings would come from position elimination off the general fund.
Right.
But my question was the follow-on to that, which is, okay, if those positions are being eliminated or if they're being put into a proprietary or someplace else, what are the services that they're currently performing that we're now going to be losing the benefit of?
And that speaks to, I think, Councilwoman Hahn, the last time we spoke about this in committee. I think it was probably a month ago now. Those are her primary concerns: is what services are being lost. And I think that's a fair question. I think it's an important question to answer. But I think because the needs of neighborhood councils have changed, it's not an easy question to answer necessarily. We in meeting with neighborhood council advocates from all over the city, the original proposal from the mayor in draft form changed significantly to add some components that made sense to the mayor, including some you'll see in the staff breakdowns, and I've actually got copies of it. I think they accompanied the mayor's transmittal, but I'm happy to send them out again. It's kind of a breakdown of what the 18 staff members, their job responsibilities would be to do. Mm-hmm. And I've got copies here if you need it.
I have that. My question is, what are the job responsibilities of the 20 that we will no longer have, not
Right,
the 18.
and I'll defer to the general manager on that. But I think what you'll see as those jobs, some things because of the recommendations from or suggestions from neighborhood council advocates, you'll see on here volunteer management. That there's a lot of things that are provided by staff that's no longer going to be provided by staff, either because there's not a need anymore. There's not a need to create a new system because that was created. There's not as much of a need to certify neighborhood councils. The funding program, depending on what we do with that, will change the amount of staff and change the services that need to be provided. And then hopefully, with the new, with a new streamlined staff, that will be able to tap into the resources of neighborhood councils themselves to provide some of the services that were once provided by those 20 staff members.
See, but I see $5.8 million for CDD, Officer of Neighborhood Support. $1.6 million is going to pay for the salary and related costs of 18 staff members. $4 million is going to provide the $45,000 to neighborhood councils, and $140,000 is budgeted to cover related neighborhood council expenses. So you're looking at $5.8 million going into CDD for Officer of Neighborhood Support. That's a lot of money. That's a whole lot of money. And now I asked the neighborhood councils that are here in this room. Tarzana, I saw here. West Hills, I see here. North Hollywood, I see here. I would question those that have been established for a period of time, how often they rely on Dunn for any kind of unusual support, or if they're, it's like an airplane gets that 33,000, they're moving smooth, and then they check with the tower when they're going to land. I mean, I think a lot of them are at that. I'm looking at $5.8 million. That's a whole lot of money, plus these other expenditures. And what do we actually, the budget, and I was on Budget and Finance Committee at the last part to try and make this happen. We still have some big holes in it, which I think we approved today in council. I mean, I don't know what, I'm trying to figure out what the heck we're doing with this expenditure when we're supposed to consolidate and it's supposed to be this big headline, we're saving dollars. I don't see us saving a whole lot of anything. I see us doing a lot of talking, and maybe we're doing more interference with neighborhood councils than we're doing support and help for them.
Well, and I think your questions kind of get back to Councilman Krikorian's question about function. We talked about budget, and then maybe there's a component of function as well. And I think that the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment had this kind of broad brush of services that were provided, and that's where I was speaking to the consolidation, the focus of those resources on areas in areas of need. As you've seen in the various reports that I've mentioned, there's a number of fixes that need to happen. Neighborhood councils are even the strong neighborhood councils, there are certain things that should have been imposed, certain things that should have come along with the creation of Dunn and the creation of Bonk and the creation of neighborhood councils that weren't really the focus 10 years ago. The focus was certification, and the focus was creating this system. And now the focus, as you've seen in the reports, and not only the controller's report, but also the NCRC report, the focus has been accountability, has been transparency, has been the getting rid of bureaucracy, and I think that's one of the hopes with this as well. You've got a department that we've proposed to put Dunn with that does amazing management of providing services and amazing management of finances, and I think that making this synergy between these two departments will allow some of those fixes to happen. Will focus those resources to some of the things that neighborhood councils probably don't think that they need, but from a city perspective, from a use of taxpayer dollars, need to be in place and should have been in place from day one, but weren't, because that wasn't the focus. And that I think is the hope with putting these departments together. And that doesn't necessarily speak to the money and how it's going to be used, is your question.
Well, that's my concern, is the dollars we're spending. We talk about tight budget times when we're spending that kind of money, and I'm seeing what we're getting for those dollars. If I'm going to spend $30, I don't expect it a hamburger. That's $30, I want prime rib. Mm-hmm. We're spending $30, and we're not even getting a hamburger. We're getting a little hot dog, a mini dog.
So you expect,
That doesn't fill me up.
So you expect less money or more meat is the point.
Well, and I think the more meat in that scenario would be some of these things that need to be established within neighborhood
We can
councils.
identify with food because that's a common denominator.
Fair enough.
Well,
Fair enough.
so on the subject of transparency and accountability, which legitimate subject that we really need to be talking to at this halfway point, figuring out there have been wrinkles, there have been bumps in the road, there have been situations that have come up that frankly have been embarrassing to the neighborhood council movement that we need to address forthrightly. One concern I have about this consolidation proposal is that we lose the accountability, it seems to me, and transparency that comes from having one person who is responsible for the neighborhood council movement and neighborhood empowerment who reports directly to the mayor. Under this proposal, the head of the Office of Neighborhood Empowerment would be, as I understand the organizational charts, 2 steps removed from the mayor, a report to a supervisor who would report to the general manager who would report to the mayor. And it seems to me that that would have the tendency of minimizing the degree of accountability and oversight, certainly by the mayor's office. And it would also send a signal, I think, to the city and to the neighborhood councils that the neighborhood empowerment movement is less of a priority for the city than it used to be. And related to that, I'm also concerned about the fact that the proposed ordinance even goes so far as to say that the name of the department will be Community Development and Neighborhood Empowerment, commonly known as the Community Development Department. And I'm baffled as to why it is that the ordinance itself says by law that we will refer to this department as something other than a department with neighborhood empowerment in the name.
Yeah.
Why is that? And don't you think that that sends the wrong signal on our commitment to neighborhood empowerment, first of all? And then if you could talk about the accountability and transparency issue, I think the mayor really needs to have someone who reports to them about what neighborhood councils are doing, how we can better support them, how we can improve them, what sorts of tasks they ought to be, fulfilling more vigorously, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah. And I'll address the name of the department first. I absolutely agree with you that that the name of the department does not appropriately show a commitment to neighborhood empowerment and the power of the neighborhood empowerment community, and it actually doesn't speak honestly about the mayor's trust and support of neighborhood councils. I'm going to get some chuckles behind me, I'm sure, but the mayor does have a lot of respect, have a lot of trust, and is amazed on a regular basis at the things neighborhood councils do. And I'll tell you quite honestly, the name of the department is based on what the department is viewed as from the federal government. It was really to stop any confusion as far as funding streams that come in from the state or from the federal government. It was not meant at all as a slight to neighborhood councils or the neighborhood empowerment movement. But I think you have a fair question. But that's really where it comes from, is to stop any confusion as far as the hundreds of millions of dollars that come in from various levels of government.
Sure, but that's not just a matter of form, because I wouldn't expect that it was done as an intentional slight or something like that. But it does, I think, reinforce the concern that many have that neighborhood empowerment is not the core function of the CDD. The core function of the CDD is administering federal funds for the benefit of community development.
I would agree and disagree. In a larger, at least in my view and the mayor's view, in a larger picture of neighborhood empowerment, I would think that all that CDD does could and should fall under neighborhood empowerment. The job training and the community development that's done from all aspects should be viewed as neighborhood empowerment. I mean,
right, but that's okay. But it's a different animal than what we've tried to create over the last 10 years with direct neighborhood democracy and the elected neighborhood council structure and all that. Yeah, I mean, in a broad sense, any community development could be described as neighborhood empowerment. But what I'm saying is the core functions that we're talking about that Dunn has performed are different than the core function that CDD is there to perform.
True.
And you mentioned earlier some overlap of areas of interest and expertise and skill sets and so on. And that is true. There is some common area, but there's also common area between what the neighborhood council movement is doing and what the public works does, or what building and safety does, or what planning does, or what DWP does. And, because we've tried to push authority into the neighborhoods and into the communities to deal with many of the basic functions of our city and to engage them in that process. And so I think you could say that many other departments have some overlap as well with what
Sure.
neighborhood councils do. So I'm not sure that those examples really demonstrate to me that that's a natural fit. And in some respects, CDD is especially problematic because so many of the managerial responsibilities at CDD are funded by reimbursements with federal money and so on. And so I continue to struggle with how it is that somebody who's currently working at least full-time and probably more than full-time already and getting their time reimbursed through federal grant programs can add more responsibilities onto their plate when their plate is already full.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah. And
Asking Councilman Zine how you added the responsibilities of Budget and Finance Committee to your already full plate?
Because I'm a workaholic, and that's the problem.
Fair enough. But
Not everybody's a workaholic.
But the difference is the same taxpayers are paying the same money to Mr. Zine and to myself and expect a lot from us. The federal taxpayers are paying for much of the work that's currently being done by CDD through federal grant money, and that's those are silos that are kind of impenetrable in some ways. And then if we know that silo is full, I'm going to stretch this metaphor too far, I can tell, but if they're I think you got what I'm saying. They're already getting fully reimbursed for their full-time position with federal money, and now we're saying, but could you also take on these other responsibilities to deal with neighborhood and community issues for which there is going to be no reimbursement? I don't know how we do that without effect. I mean, I think that the federal government might look at this and say, wait a minute, you mean the same people are working on what we've asked them to do, and now you've added additional responsibilities, and you're still sending the same reimbursement requests to Washington? How does that work?
Right, and there will absolutely have to be a firewall and have to be reimbursement of if there's staff time that's done on federal. Absolutely, there'll have to be that.
Well, and thank you, but I was going to get to that. I mean, somebody is going to have to oversee and administer that, which is going to be an additional layer of administrative time and expense just to make sure that firewall is maintained.
True, but is already done on some levels. I mean, CDD I think has a lot of different responsibilities, especially with the new departments that have been added onto their plate already approved. That there has to be some sort of oversight as far as that happens. So I think it's a fair concern. I think that the general manager of CDD and the AGM of CDD can probably speak better to it than I can. But there are ways to. There are ways to pay for the work that's done that can't be paid for by federal and state money.
Okay. Can I comment on that as well? The mayor's proposed budget does include $200,000 for those costs, for those administrative costs. So this is the staff time. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, I think Mr. Sines spoke and he gave an example of 10% of his time was spent on neighborhood empowerment work, that he could not build a federal grant against that work, and therefore the general fund would have to pick up that 10% of his time. So we did in the mayor's proposed budget include $200,000 for those purposes.
Is that part of the $5.8 million?
That's part of the.
I'm trying to add up these dollars, and all it shows is $5.8 million for CDD.
Yeah, that's part of the $5.8 million.
Okay.
And Councilman Krikourian, you had asked about the transparency and accountability,
Yeah.
and I wanted to speak to that a little bit. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of pieces that should have been a part of neighborhood councils and neighborhood empowerment from day one. The services that are provided to neighborhood councils citywide are not services that we can push pause on. They're services that need to be continuously provided to neighborhood councils. And so if you're going to, I'm looking for a better word than impose, but really we're talking about imposing new systems upon neighborhood councils. If we are, as far as doing some of the accountability and transparencies that the controller calls for and that the NCRC calls for, that to be able to do those sorts of things, the best way to do it and continue, at least in our opinion, the best way to impose those things while continuing to provide those services are by having it done by the best and the brightest and the people in the city who do it best. And CDD are the best at that. They're the best in the city. They're the best at trainings. They're the best at accountability measures. They're the best at financial oversight. And so to take some of their work product and impose it, and again, I don't like the word, but that's really what we're talking about. Impose it on neighborhood councils is really the only way that we can see to have those things that need to happen from a financial standpoint of a city of protecting taxpayer dollars, while continuing to provide the services that just have to continue to make sure neighborhood empowerment continues to thrive.
Okay. Although another component of that may perhaps should be part of this discussion is that some of the best people in the city at mentorship and training and some of those others are members of neighborhood councils.
Absolutely.
And, to the extent that we can take advantage of the body of knowledge and the best practices of neighborhood councils and have those who are not doing as well learn from those who are doing better and create a governance structure that takes advantage of the strengths that we have in the existing neighborhood council system, I think that would be a way to advance the ball as well that may or may not be
right.
Fit within this.
Absolutely,
mold.
and I think that's part of it. And the other part of it, I think, speaks to the kind of like the big elephant in the room, which is the funding program.
And I was going to get to that.
Okay.
Now, why hasn't that been developed as a policy proposal yet, or has it, and we just haven't talked about it?
Well, there is a proposal from the Community Development Department on how, if they had this function within CD, how they would envision a funding program work. There are other proposals that are out there that I'm not sure the most appropriate place for them to be evaluated. With the mayor's office proposing for this to go to CDD, not to go to CDD, to merge with CDD, for CDD, current CDD staff and staff from Dunn that's moved over, that the funding program that the mayor's office would support is one that current CDD staff is recommending. If they're going to take it on and they're going to try to put it in the same format, the same accountability, the same rules that they have, that it makes sense from the mayor's office perspective that those same systems be applied to neighborhood council, so there's consistency throughout the department. So even though there are a number of proposals out there, and CDD, I'm sure when we bring them, when they come to the table, whether today or other on subsequent meetings, can speak more specifically to a funding program. But the proposal would be one that would mirror what CDD does with their community-based organizations they work with currently. And that's again the people.
And in a nutshell, what would that be? You don't need to give a full presentation
Sure.
on it at this point. But
Sure.
what would that
in a nutshell,
look like?
in a nutshell, that would be working with local nonprofits to help with the bookkeeping. Letting neighborhood councils choose between a number of organizations citywide, hopefully ones that would be more localized, ones that would be closer to their community, so they wouldn't necessarily have to come downtown to get a check cut. They could go to their local bookkeeper who would then be on contract with the city, with the neighborhood council chosen by the neighborhood council, to help move that money. Because right now, especially with the constraints to do, I mean, CDD will explain, when you do one little thing of petty cash within a department, it has to touch 10 different hands before you actually get the money back in your pocket. And that's kind of the situation we're dealing with now. And neighborhood councils can speak for hours and have spoken for hours and hours about the constraints of the system and trying to get a check out of the controller's office. There's so many forms you have to do. So the hope with partnering with some of the organizations that CDD already has current relationships with, that hopefully these communities have relationships with, would hopefully streamline that process, get rid of some of the bureaucracy. So a turnaround on a check could conceivably be 2 to 3 days instead of 2 to 3 weeks as it is now.
And what's the cost of that going to be?
That's a good question. I think the proposal from CDD would be to cap to cap the money, to cap the percentage at 8%. But that's something that would be negotiated between each neighborhood council and that nonprofit. I mean, it's possible if and again, I'm thinking West LA. If the what's it called? I'm trying to think the training organization. There's a Jewish Vocational Services. It would be an example. This is an organization that CDD works with currently, and if they were to be an organization that a neighborhood council would choose to partner with, potentially. Jewish Vocational Services would say, we understand that that we can charge up to 8% to do this bookkeeping, but we're a partner and we'd like to donate. We'd like to donate that and just do it for free. They would eat the cost, but that's a partnership. So I mean, CDD would like to cap it at a certain percentage, but as far as what it would cost remains to be seen. And each neighborhood council would have the opportunity under this proposal to work with that organization and see how best to make it happen. And again, I know I didn't do a very good explanation of what that relationship would be, but that's really, it would be bookkeeping functions. So there would be more oversight, more clear oversight, and standardized oversight, standardized forms. The NCRC talked about the need for standardized bylaws and election procedures and any number of things, and that's not what this proposal speaks to. But with the funding program, that's one of the components. One of the thoughts is to standardize, as the controller was calling for, as the NCRC calls for, and I think as the City Council has called for, to have some sort of standardized processing, so we know where our money is, so we know where the public's money is.
But before we go to public comment, let's talk about very briefly about process. If you can talk a little bit about the policy development that was involved. You mentioned a number of times that there were some neighborhood council representatives who had offered certain input and who would speak to certain things. To what degree have the policy proposals that you've presented here today, or that the mayor's office is still working on, to what degree have they been offered for comment by the broad range of neighborhood councils and their members? What steps have been taken to engage the neighborhood councils as such into this dialogue and get the input as to practical impacts and so forth?
Well, I will admit right off the bat that there hasn't been enough of that. That I think I don't know. I don't think there's a threshold that you get to where you necessarily have enough. I think there's a lot of opinions out there, and rightfully so. I think every neighborhood council, as Councilman Zine mentioned, and as anybody who was on either the charter commissions will say, that the intent was for them to be independent and have their own personality and their own view on how things should work. So. And so I don't think you'd ever get to a threshold where you say, okay, well, we've done enough vetting. We've satisfied. There's no threshold. But the mayor's office is in constant communication with neighborhood councils through our field staff and also through the budget process. Every year there are representatives elected through the mayor's budget day who come in on a regular basis. Some of which are in the room. Who represent their region. They're elected each budget day, 2 per region of the seven planning regions in the city. And we've been doing that for a number of years. And so some of the input is with those budget advocates. But also, neighborhood council members and neighborhood board members and volunteers and people who sit on the board or don't sit on the board, they're not shy. We even, whether it's formal, come and let's have a town hall about a new proposal, or informal conversations, or comments at hearings, or comments from comments as part of the discussion with the NCRC, with council members, with like I said, our field staff. That there has been a considerable amount, and as I mentioned, there have been some significant changes from the original thoughts of the mayor's proposal. Can I tell you specific dates when we went out specifically and said, "What do you think?" I can't. But I can say that there has been a lot of consideration from concerns of neighborhood councils, from current and previous commentary from neighborhood councils, from some of the problems that have arisen, from some of the strengths that have come up, and I said strengths because that speaks to some of the volunteer coordination that we'd like to do to harness some of those strengths that you spoke to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gross. Mr. Stein, you have anything else? Okay, I think what I'm going to do now is turn to some of those shy people and and begin to take some public comment. But I do want to point out to everybody here, and Mr. Gross as well, this is the beginning of a discussion about this. When we come back again at our next meeting, I expect to have further discussion about this policy, about the budgetary implications and so forth. So I don't anticipate that we're going to take a vote today. I don't anticipate that there's going to be any, in fact, I know that we're not going to take a vote today. There's not going to be a policy resolution at this meeting, but this is a first opportunity, I think, for everyone to start to provide some input, which I hope that you'll find useful as well.
And might I also comment that it was a mistake that I didn't mention this process. That the mayor's office knows that there's a legislative process. He respects the legislative process, and knew that a lot of the issues, a lot of the concerns with the proposal would come up during this process.
Thank you.
If the mayor respects that, why does he go to a mediator on the budget with the labor unions instead of coming to the council and the ERC?
I don't know that I can speak.
I'd like to know why he goes to a mediator instead of coming to the ERC and coming to the council, if he respects that.
I will see if I can.
I find that disrespectful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So what I'm going to do, thank you, Mr. Gross. What I'm going to do is take a comment first on the agenda item, which is the mayor's proposal and the proposed ordinance. I expect that's probably what everyone, if not almost nearly everyone, wants to talk about. But then when we conclude that, there will be a time for general public comment as well, if anybody wants to share any thoughts about any other issue within the jurisdiction of this committee. So let's go ahead and start. Let's have 2 minutes per speaker. We've got a lot of cards. And we will start with Tony Wilkinson, followed by Jim McQuiston. Well, you were next anyway, so. Let's have it. If you know what, why don't we go with Mr. McQuiston first, if you don't mind, and then we'll go to Mr. Wiseman. Sir. Dr.
Jim McQuiston, you have my statement. I'm preparing an alternative draft for the ordinance. I think all of your statements have been well placed. I must say, as I made a comment earlier to CLA, Aaron is in a very, very difficult position. I don't remember Aaron ever coming to any of the Charter Commission hearings when I was there, and as Mr. Zine knows, we've gone back a long way. I do want to say that some time ago, in this hearing room, a senior city attorney came in and commenting on the way the neighborhood council's movement was going, and she said, "I think we made a mistake. We went down the wrong fork in the road when we got up our ordinance." I see no fork in the road. If I were mayor, I would want to probably downgrade neighborhood councils because I don't want anybody looking over my neck. And if I ask neighborhood councils just like when you, in a budget hearing, when you ask people, they always say, oh, I've got to have this more money, I've got to have this, that, or the other thing, because there is a self-interest. Now, I am not in a neighborhood council, but I believe we have to have them. I can remember when Mayor Shaw was mayor, and so I know that if we have this charter, we have to have an oversight that is not part of the city of Los Angeles, and that is exactly where Article 9 is, because I made sure that that was true when at that level. Now, as far as the legislative history is concerned, this is the only thing we can go by. And it doesn't say why we got up neighborhood councils. Everyone has its own opinion. But if you read the plain language, it says they have to do only one thing and they must do it. And that particular thing, as you see in my statement, does not take a lot of money to do. The only time that it takes money is if you have to hire a lawyer, and if you're a poor area, you can't afford it. And that is why we have Article 9. And that is why we have to say to the mayor, gee, I'm sorry, we have to do it some other way. But we only have 45 days to do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Wiseman.
Thank you very much, sir. It's always a pleasure to follow Mr. McQuiston, because I've been following him as long as I've been active in this group and have found his advice and wisdom to be very, very helpful. I'm going to follow it by saying that one thing the neighborhood councils are supposed to be doing is advising the mayor on the priorities of the budget. That is the one specific thing in the charter. Now, in this room, and Mr. Zine will recall, I've had an interchange with Ms. Hahn about the word experiment.
Experiment?
I've always called it an experiment, Mr. Zine. It is still an experiment. We are still a work in process. We still do not have a good definition of the attachment the neighborhood councils have to the government, nor do we have a good definition of how the neighborhood councils can continue to be independent advisors. And the devil take the hindmost. There are people in city government who would rather we not bother them, as Mr. McQuiston just said so. And I don't blame them for, being bothered by us. On the other hand, you put us into the city government, you got what you asked for, the cat's out of the bag, and we're not going to get stuffed back into it again, are we? Now, we're here to talk about this future of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and the future of the neighborhood councils. And I think there's no one in this room who isn't aware of the fact that those are two very, very different entities. The Department of Neighborhood Empowerment was supposed to support and develop and certify the neighborhood councils. They've done that at this point. What do they do from now on? That question came up from NCRC. It continues to come up. And in my view, the thing that they should be doing is supporting and helping the neighborhood councils develop and create that independent advisory function, which is so important to the city. I was going to start by talking about two different ways of looking at the word ignorance. Ignorance may be a problem. I'm going to speak as a doctor now. Ignorance may be a problem that you just cannot understand because of some impediment in your own personality. The other form of ignorance, which we neighborhood councils have been experiencing much too much of, and we're getting very frustrated and unhappy about it, is to be ignored by the city council, by the city government, by all the agencies who would like us to go away and stop bothering them. I think that's really what we're here for. Bottom line, CDD done relationships. I hope that what you were talking about before, Mr. Krikorian, is to call a conference on it. We will call a conference, and I've already started some of the process to do that at the LANC Coalition. It's been done at the Valley Alliance, at the RAC, at these various coalitions of neighborhood councils all across town. We're extremely interested in the way this is going to work out. And the big gorilla that is not in the room is the neighborhood councils. We really have not been engaged and involved in the solutions to our own problems. And I think we are well into our adolescence. Again, I can speak as a pediatrician. We're well into our adolescence.
Thank you.
That betwixt and between time when we're no longer dependent on our parents, but we're not quite ready to take full adulthood. But I think we're getting very close to it, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to do that.
Thank you
so
Dr.
much.
Rushman, very much. Our next speaker is Judy Price, followed by Jay Handel. Thank you, Doctor.
Hello. Good
Welcome.
afternoon. I'm Judy Price. I'm with Valley Glen. First, I want to thank this committee for everything you did to keep the neighborhood council funds, even though we couldn't save the rollovers, having the budget. One of the things I'm
Saved a lot
concerned
of
about,
Saved a lot of it.
You saved
Go
a
ahead.
lot of it. One of the things I'm concerned about, and I think the mayor, with all due respect to his representative, made the case why Dunn should not be merged with CDD. I did not hear a valid point in his entire presentation. They have nothing in common with the neighborhood councils or the mission of the neighborhood councils. One of the other concerns I have is local nonprofits managing the funding. I mean, I'm sorry. I think that is a road to disaster. And who's going to pay for it? Is that supposed to come out of the neighborhood council money? I mean, I think we're talking, it's all double talk in terms of the budget. There's not really going to be a real savings here. And then what about the elections? Who's going to pay for that? Now, the city clerk is still in the ordinance with the elections. They still have a couple $1 million budgeted. Now, where's the funding for the elections going to come from, and who's going to administer it? So I think there's some real serious considerations that go beyond just the merger. You know, $45,000, and many neighborhood councils use that for local improvements, because let's face it, we're not getting the city services we used to. So how much is going to be enough to cover the costs that are going to bounce back to the neighborhood councils? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jay Handel, followed by Lisa Sarkin.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jay Handel. I'm the chair of the West LA Neighborhood Council. First of all, I don't see us as an experiment, but rather as a 10-year-old with pretty dysfunctional parents who keep changing the rules on us a lot. And you can't really blame us for crossing the street when we shouldn't have, because yesterday we were allowed to. So, having said that, thank you for the laugh. I'll be at the Laugh Factory. No. You know, to me, the question, for a long time I was really concerned about CDD, this one, that. The question isn't where you park it. The question is how you park it. That's the big consideration here, okay? Unless you have proper systems, funding systems, grievance systems, outreach systems, mentoring systems, unless you put the proper systems into place, which have not been in place and have not been enforceable with those that you have, I don't care where you park it. You can park it with sanitation. It's not going to make a difference. It's going to fail, okay? You need proper procedures. You need proper systems. You need proper protections. You need proper enforcement powers, okay, so that when people misbehave, there's an ability to do something about it as opposed to close your eyes and hope something will happen. There needs to be a vision and a goal for Dunn going forward. And I think that's the bigger thing that's missing in the whole conversation, and we've heard it a lot today. What core services should they be giving to neighborhood councils, and what should neighborhood councils expect from whatever department is left over? And there has to be proper staffing to affect that vision. Outsourcing funding, and I've sent you many emails, to me is a mistake. At 8% of 91 times $45,000, you're giving away $150,000 more than funding 2 full-time employees with all the benefits. That's a giveaway to local nonprofits. That, to me, is just a taxpayer waste of money at a time where we can't afford it, and you're firing 2 people from the payroll of the city of Los Angeles, and that's unimaginable. I know my time is up. Just a very quick, on a separate note, okay, I learned today the department recovered $20,000 from one of the people who was just convicted of taking money through the neighborhood council system. So Dunn really isn't as bad as people say. The system can work if you allow them to do the work, and that's $20,000 of our taxpayer money that's now been recovered, and the people at Dunn and the staff that did that should actually get a pat on the back as opposed to the stab in the back that a lot of people have been giving them lately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Lisa Sarkin, followed by Heinrich Kiefer.
Well, everything I was going to say is you two have already questioned, and I want to thank you for all of those wonderful questions. And I hope that when we have the next meeting, we get an answer to any of them. But I think that Dennis really hit the nail on the head, and I think we just got another $200,000, and we're down to not even $1 million maybe that's going to be saved by devastating the neighborhood council's support. So when you look at the two missions, which I didn't have the done one, but I have for you, the mission of the CDD is to create jobs and strengthen families. I really don't think that neighborhood councils should be responsible for anything like that. That has nothing to do with what the mission statement for local needs through the creation of a citywide system of neighborhood councils, what the neighborhood councils are supposed to do. All that's fluff that we get to do after we've done our outreach, heard from our people, what they want us to do, what they want us to follow, and how they see our neighborhoods in the future. Right now, if we don't have some kind of support, many of the neighborhood councils are getting to the point where the people who are on their boards will have to leave. Like our neighborhood council, you can only be on the council for 6 years. So we're getting to the point where many people will have to be retrained. We don't get any of that right now. 2 years ago, no one came to our, when we brought in the new people on the board, and no one came to give the instructions that we all got 3 years ago. So we have there won't be anybody to support the turnover, which should not be the responsibility of the neighborhood councils. It can't be the responsibility of the CDD. I don't think they can do the work they're supposed to do now. And we would just be lost in the giant department. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Next speaker is Heinrich Kiefer, followed by Leonard Schaefer.
Heinrich Kiefer,
Kiefer,
32-year resident of Highland Park, a former historic Highland Park Neighborhood Council president, and I'm serving a third term as treasurer, filling in for one of the fellows that could no longer fulfill his term. I'm also an NC budget advocate, and I believe that the work that's been done with the ordinance right now needs considerably more work in order for something to actually come together. The merger has been a little bit weak, or the agreement that we see in front of us. We need a strong system to support our neighborhood councils, and I'm not sure if we're going to get that right now. At our last advocate meeting, we had one of the GMs from the department come in from the CDD, and I was disappointed. It seemed like he didn't have a good representation of really what he thought he might be able to do for the new merged done, and that to me was a little bit of a sign. So I hope that the members of this committee will take strong views to really research and do the homework to make sure that whatever occurs is going to work for the system, for the stakeholders, and for the neighborhood council system. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Leonard Schaefer, followed by Joanne Ivanic-Gar.
He only needs a minute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Leonard Schaefer, Chair, Tarzana Neighborhood Council, Chair of the Lank, NCRC Commissioner. And I will disagree with some of the things that Mr. Gross had to say about the NCRC. We look toward certain standardizations, but not the kind that he's been talking about. I've got so many things, I'm not sure where to begin. Let's begin with first something that you said, Council Member, and that has to do with accountability. Not only who would speak to the mayor as a GM, but who would I, as the president of my neighborhood council, speak to as the GM of Dunn? This whole thing is really a sham. This is CDD absorbing a department that was created by a vote of the people. The GM of this department would have to go off the books one way or the other to serve one master or the other. It's just not going to work. A question I wrote down here while it was going on is could a standalone Dunn that accepts the help from its stakeholders, that is the neighborhood councils, be just as successful as one that combined with the CDD? We have tried for a number of years to offer help. The NCRC looked at Dunn and said, now that neighborhood councils are formed, what should they be? What should Dunn do? How does Dunn transform itself from a formative thing to one that helps in-place neighborhood councils, works with them? And one of the ways is to take advice from, and volunteerism from those you're overseeing. We've tried that. It didn't work. I think that a standalone done with some of the ideas that have been put forward through Budget LA and organizations like that, where, by the way, about 300 distinct persons listened to presentations and listened to Larry Frank and talked to Larry Frank and others from the mayor's office with regard to this, where a standalone done was contemplated initially with volunteerism, with the idea that a nonprofit could help handle the funding. That makes a lot of sense. Taking these few people, dumping them into this thing called CDD, where they're going to get lost, where there's going to be a problem with people going off the funding books to work with these people and to help them, it just is, it's going to be a nightmare. I just don't think it should go through this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Joanne Ivonic Garb, followed by Sharon Cummins.
Hi, thank you. One thing I will say is that I will disagree with Mr. Gross in that it is critical when a council member's representative comes to our neighborhood council meetings. We get, when Mr. Zine's staff member comes to our office, it's a two-way exchange. She tells us what's happening in his office and things that are pertinent to us, and we tell her things that are pertinent to our neighborhood council. So there's a two-way exchange. I've been involved with neighborhood councils now for about 3.5 years, and the review commission, this is the first time I've ever heard of the review commission or anything that was done by it, but that's neither here nor there. This is, with the present economy, this is the time you should be relying on the community and what the ideas that we can generate. Having a CDD, you know, Mr. Gross said, well, they can sponsor a health fair. Well, 3 years ago, West Hills Neighborhood Council did a health fair that was attended by over 600 people, and it was standing room only at the Marriott Hotel. We got everything donated. So it was a very low-cost project. We do Fall Fest every year, where we now get 8,000 people coming to our Fall Fest. You know, this is not insignificant numbers. We're doing a lot of outreach to the community. Where we need it done is to pay our bills. And it doesn't take 2 to 3 weeks to get a bill paid. It takes 4 to 6 months. And usually we have to submit the paperwork 3 to 4 times. Okay? I don't know about other neighborhood councils, but we have a budget committee that all bills have to go to the budget committee. From there it goes to the controller. From the controller it goes to the treasurer, and the treasurer it goes to Dunn. Okay? Now, those bills that were paid by Dunn in the past that we're now recuperating the costs, where was Dunn? Why did they pay bills for limousine companies? Why did they pay bills for restaurants? You know, these are questions that should have been asked, not that paint all the neighborhood councils with the same brush. I have more to say, but my time is up. Thank you.
We will have general comment later, so if you want to come back, we'll have another chance.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sharon Cummins, followed by Lydia Mather.
Oh, thank you, council member. You actually pronounced it right.
A little bit of practice.
I usually get Cummins. The Cummings gives me plausible deniability. I just say, I wasn't the Sharon who said that. I represent Mar Vista Community Council. I have the privilege of being reelected first vice chair, in spite of my best efforts, I might add. I'm not going to read this into the record because I believe my chair sent you a copy this morning, Councilmember Krikorian.
Yes.
But I want to point out that we have some real problems with this so-called organizational chart. It looks like an octopus. It looks like we're at the bottom. We think we should report direct. The Department of Neighborhood Empowerment should be in a position where the general manager or exec director reports directly to Mr. Benbow. We think that's the best, most efficient way to manage this if it's going to occur at all. And I concur with everything the previous speaker said about funding. It's very time-consuming, and my sense is that an outside not-for-profit might lengthen the process, not streamline it. And then I would also like to, as a private citizen, address some of the comments I've heard about experiments and neighborhood councils being an experiment. in these various hearings, I have a pretty good idea of what this job is. When my stakeholders tell me they want something, if it's not illegal and it's not racist, it's my job to go do it. So when I open up my email inbox on a Friday morning and I've got 30 emails from a middle school upset because someone downtown in LAUSD decided it was okay to put an 80-bus depot taking sports fields away from our kids, it becomes my job to facilitate their conversation with LAUSD. And I promise you, by Monday morning, we had facilitated that conversation so well and so emphatically that the proposition was dead on arrival. I'm not an experiment. I don't consider my community council to be an experiment. I take this work very seriously, and I hope as we go forward that any proposals in mergers or not will help us be more efficient rather than the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lydia Mather, followed by Mary Garcia.
I'm Lydia Drew Mather, President Van Nuys Neighborhood Council. I would like to read a letter into the record that I was unable to email this morning. This is in regards to the proposed merger of Dunn from the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council. On May 12, 2010, the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council reviewed and considered the proposed merger of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and the Community Development Department. We examined and found the notion of being merged with CDD and nonprofits and having VNNC finances handled by a nonprofit to be wholly inconsistent with the charter and the intent of the vote of the people of Los Angeles for a standalone entity of neighborhood councils. The Van Nuys Neighborhood Council felt that the cost to councils of 8 to 14% for administrating our funds would be unacceptable and possibly suspect. It appears that the merger may be nothing more than a way to reroute taxpayer funds into preferred nonprofit accounts. We also found that it would create another layer of bureaucracy between city government and the NCs that is clearly in conflict with the charter's intent. We have read the proposed ordinance, and the VNNC finds there are no elements of the plan that are acceptable, nor in support of the intended democratic process of neighborhood councils. In a vote that was taken that evening, the results are as follows. Against the merger of Dunn and CDD, 17 ayes, 0 noes, 0 abstaining. This is the basic crux to it. There's nowhere in the charter that says neighborhood councils are supposed to become grassroots organizers or adjuncts to nonprofits to be impressed into service in this process. Like my speaker before me said, we do important things. We stopped an eminent domain for a school. We stopped untenable housing that would egregiously impact our communities. We create a bridge between our government electeds and the community. That is our function, to advise and communicate. It is not our function to go out and organize. And I will agree with Mr. Gross on one important thing, and that his examples were not diverse, and his input on this process that was given to the mayor, unfortunately, was not diverse either. It was very, very narrow and very myopic. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mary Garcia, followed by Barbara Monahan-Burke.
Thank you. I also sent you something for the record, but I just want to read this. First, I just want to say that on my neighborhood council, we already do a lot of the work that the mayor's person was speaking about. We support health fairs and we support other activities in the community. We support what the neighborhood wants or the community wants. And I also want to say 2 of my colleagues could not be here today because they work. That's Adrienne O'Neill and Maggie Flanora. So, and they also want Dunn to be standalone. I am for the intent, the vision, and the spirit of the charter. I am not for a merger between CDD and Dunn. I am for a standalone Dunn. I feel it is a disservice to the role that was created for us in the charter. We are an advisory body to all departments and all city officials. We live possibly in the most unique city in the world. We have more diversity than any other city in this country. I believe other cities are looking to us for leadership in many ways. If we follow what has been provided us in the charter, other large cities will follow because it's a success. I say we embrace the moment and make the neighborhood council system all and more that was intended in the charter. There was a time in Los Angeles, and I know you're all too young to remember this, but we were #1 in education, in entertainment, in manufacturing, in aerospace, and more.
Leonard Schaefer was here at that time.
I know.
And Dr. Weissman.
And,
It wasn't
and,
that one.
and I think that we can be number one in participatory democracy, as in the charter.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Barbara Monahan Burke, followed by Jill Banks Broad.
Barbara Monahan Burke, Studio City Neighborhood Council board member and business owner and homeowner, and I'm speaking personally. I oppose the mayor's proposal for the consolidation of CDD and Dunn. I have studied the charter really very, very deeply for the last couple of years. The neighborhood council system should be an independent, standalone department, a charter-created department. Our mission is advisory to government, including but not limited to the mayor for budget. And when there's talk about the neighborhood council budget advocates, they are to the mayor. That's what that committee is for, to the mayor. The city council, the city commissions, the lead staff of departments, other city officials, MOUs, task forces. We are supposed to communicate back and forth with the government to our stakeholders and to be advocates not only to represent our communities and the city as a whole, but to literally give voice to our diverse stakeholders individually throughout government. We are not a corps of volunteers for the CDD and their select nonprofits. We are the grassroots level of the participatory democracy that the Charter intends our neighborhood councils to be. Each independent neighborhood council sets their own agenda and should. We are not here to serve other departments such as the CDD with nonprofits or the mayor's vision of nonprofits or anything else. This outrageous proposal is completely unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jill Banks Broad, followed by Noel Weiss.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you, Councilmember Krikorian and Councilmember Zine, for welcoming public input on this very important issue and considering both the policy issues and other alternatives. I'm here today speaking for two organizations. I'm the founder and chair of the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils and the president of the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council. Both of these organizations have voted unanimously against the proposed merger of Dunn and CDD. We feel that it is just not a good fit and would greatly dilute the neighborhood council system. There's too many layers of bureaucracy that would be created, and we're not convinced it will save money. In fact, we think that it will cost more. And in listening to Mr. Gross this afternoon, I have some questions. That is, if they think that the merger will help out CDD. That's not our mission. He says it will establish neighborhood councils as a volunteer corps. That's not our mission. He said it will strengthen the city's support for nonprofit organizations controlled, contracted through CDD. That's not our mission either. There are a lot of questions about the CDD, and that is, the executive director that you mentioned today, what will be his salary? Is he paid hourly? What amount of time will he spend on neighborhood council business? Then also you mentioned the name change. This is more than symbolic, the fact that our name is going to be changed. We're really feeling that this is a loss of our identity, and we really urge that this committee and the council vote to oppose the mayor's plan and allow us to be an independent group and stand alone. The other thing is on the nonprofits. This just, I think, has the potential for ethics violations and conflict of interest. It just simply makes no sense. In fact, it doesn't mesh with our own mission at all, as stated in the charter, and it just doesn't solve the problem. It just shifts the problem. And so we, once again, thank you and urge that, that you will vote no on this proposal.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Noel Weiss, followed by Bob Brostoff. Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. Picture being worth 1,000 words. From the mayor's
2009-2010 budget, organization of City of Los Angeles, citizen departments with charter commissions, neighborhood empowerment in the mix. The mayor's latest budget, 2010-2011, neighborhood empowerment eliminated. I think that's essentially what this committee needs to concern itself with, where the mayor's true intent is really to eliminate or dilute the department. I think it has political implications, Mr. Corian, because, as you noted, this motion is also before Herb Wesson's committee. And frankly, CDD doesn't have a committee. Neighborhood councils do. What's going to happen in theory if there is some kind of a merger? Is this committee going to lose jurisdictions and everything involving neighborhood council suddenly going to go before CDD, before Herb Wesson's committee? I don't think that that's appropriate. You're the man. This is the important opportunity for you to really make a difference because we are in an important era of transition. I would hate for you to lose that opportunity. Secondly, we have a practical political problem here because all Herb Wesson has to do is sit on this for 45 days and the merger is going to be a done deal, no pun intended. We're in a situation where the City Council, if it doesn't act within 45 days, the mayor's proposal is automatically completed. So therefore, I think Eric Garcetti or you or Mr. Zine have to bring this back out of Mr. Weston's committee so that it doesn't sit there, and we got a deadline of June 25th. And more importantly, I think as a practical matter, we need to kill the mayor's proposal right today, tomorrow, very quickly, and have a vote in council, assuming you think you've got the votes, but we got to act before June 24th, because if we fail to do that, we can be talking from here to kingdom come. It ain't going to happen. So I encourage you, I urge you, get with Mr. Wesson, get with Mr. Garcetti, get it out of Mr. Wesson's committee, or force some kind of a debate or discussion so that it doesn't sit there, because there's nothing short of Rule 53, where the council can get it, bring it back out of committee. But you know, that doesn't happen very often. Lastly, I again want to encourage, which I'm going to continue to do, Section 908 of the Charter. I think it's very important. You've got to bring the neighborhood councils into this. Appoint a committee. You've got your 3 months or more, but invoke that provision. It never has. It can be a rotating situation. You can have citywide hearings. You can bring in the neighborhood councils. You can get the views, and you know what? You can come up with something that will reflect, the broader sense. And then the council then is acting appropriately. The city council is acting appropriately to reflect the real, true intent of the people and empower the people, as opposed to what the mayor's trying to do, which is top down. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Bob Brostoff, followed by Sean Simons.
Thank you. I'm Bob Brostoff. I'm also a member of the West Hills Neighborhood Council. I'm speaking my own opinions. The gentleman who just spoke beat me to the punch. Based on the discussion that I've heard today and some previous discussions with Dr. Weissman, it is my personal feeling that this proposal from the mayor is a subterfuge for nothing more than to get rid of neighborhood councils. Mr. Zine appropriately mentioned that the amount of money the city would save, if there is any at all, is like a peanut in a haystack. However, when it comes to the neighborhood councils, it is significantly more than that. It is a they've already had a 10% reduction in their allocations last year, from $50,000 to $45,000. If this thing with the nonprofits or whoever comes along, that's another 10, 15% of their funds going bye-bye. As was stated before, most of these funds that the councils get go back into the community. They serve a very useful purpose, and not only will reducing that amount of money hurt the community, it'll do away with councils eventually. I am absolutely opposed to the mayor's proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sean Simons, followed by Ed Novy.
Sean Simons, Empowerment Congress North area. The mayor's reasons for merger, as you pointed out, have little merit. The $3.1 million budget would work just as easily as a standalone, and it currently includes $490,000 that Dunn would be paying CDD for overhead. In a way, it's our dowry. The fact that CDD and NCs have like-minded purposes show that we should work together on projects. It does not mean that we should be rolled into the department. My real issue is that this is not a reorganization. It's simply a budget cut and a consolidation. And we should be looking at a reorganization. We should be looking at a way that we can reorganize to create a better and stronger neighborhood council system as we move forward. I've worked with a number of neighborhood council members on creating a launching point for such a reorganization. Wanted to go through a couple of points in the proposal. The first one would be is that the proposal represents $1 million less than the mayor's current budget of 3.1. It also represents 20 employees working to support neighborhood councils without furlough days. versus the mayor's 18. It has $450,000 for neighborhood council training, education, and programming versus the mayor's $66,000. It focuses on citywide PR to help create a more robust system. As Aaron pointed out about the Best Buy, I love it, but he also mentioned, each neighborhood council could go out and do that. Just as easily, a support system could go out with a couple of phone calls and have those same flyers in Ralph's across the city if neighborhood councils wanted to participate. A focus on connectivity so neighborhood councils can share and build off each other's work. A focus on partnerships with the city departments and nonprofits to create more involvement and more opportunities for our neighbors, for our neighborhood councils. Grant rating capabilities to leverage neighborhood council funds. I believe that even functioning councils can improve capacity and invigorate the system overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ed Novi, followed by Judith Daniels.
Hi, I'm actually one of the shy ones that comes to these committee meetings, really. My name's Ed Novi. I'm on the Sunland-Tahunga Neighborhood Council, and I'm also one of the North Valley budget advocates. You've heard a lot of great things today, and I know that you're a strong advocate for the system, as well as our own neighborhood council. And I think that sometimes with the various organizations that curtail neighborhood councils, they sometimes forget that we're really representative of the stakeholders, that there is a definitive difference between what Dunn does, what neighborhood councils do, what stakeholders know or want. Most stakeholders aren't really engaged in the Dunn CDD merger, and that's, I think, as much neighborhood council's fault as it is anybody else's. Our stakeholders don't care so much about the merger. So what we need to really do is look at what Dunn needs to do to be more relative to the stakeholders as a whole, so that we can come back to your committee, tell you what Dunn should be doing, whether it be implementing better funding controls or training and mentorship or whatever the purpose of Dunn, so it impacts stakeholders, is really what we should be focusing on. The whole idea of where Dunn gets parked isn't really so relevant. It's what gets delivered at the end of the day, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judith Daniels, followed by Helene Marden.
Hi, I'm Judith Daniels. I'm the president of the Chatsworth Neighborhood Council. I've been involved since the organizing of the Chatsworth Neighborhood Council in early 2002, I believe it was. We were never an organization that was trying to provide jobs or trying to provide anger management for anybody in our community. If CDD does those things, that's great, and somebody needs to do them. The last time I checked, that wasn't the mission of the neighborhood councils, and as I recall, we're part of the city family. We're not a nonprofit. We're part of the city family. Mr. Gross, I'm really disappointed that one of the purposes of his being here, I thought, was to be able to explain to you what the cost savings were, and he came in unprepared. So the fact that he's unprepared for you, he's also unprepared for us in exactly what the cost savings would be. He told us that one of the great things about the merger would be that CDD has the best and the brightest to be able to accomplish these various tasks. But then CDD is going to outsource the funding, which I guess means we're going to have not the brightest and not the best who would take care of our funding. I'm very concerned about potential conflicts with any of the nonprofits that we might partner with. The oft-quoted audit by the controller never found that there was a problem with the neighborhood councils. I read every word of that audit. It never found a problem with neighborhood councils. It found that there was a problem with the oversight by Dunn. And the last time I checked, the Dunn management was never hired for their financial wizardry. They were hired because they knew something about public policy, public activism, those type things. So they didn't have the tools for the oversight. So So, neighborhood councils are in many ways being punished because the audit found that there were problems. Yes, there were problems, but it wasn't the individual neighborhood councils that were problems. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that if there's a savings of $1.5 million, which is really important, and $1.5 million is a significant amount for sure, but as Mr. Zine commented, in the scheme of things, it's not that great. I wonder if we might be able to ask the mayor and maybe some other people in City Hall to check under the cushions in their sofas and shake them out and see if maybe we can come up with enough quarters that we can kind of chip away at the $1.5 million, come up with that to try to save some money. Thank you.
There's not many threads left in my sofa at this point. Next speaker is Helene Marden, followed by Russell Brown.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Helene Maiden. I'm with
Oh,
the Olympic
sorry.
Park Neighborhood Council. And,
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I wanted to thank you guys for being seemingly so supportive
Seemingly.
of huh?
Jury's still out.
I missed something.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Supportive of the neighborhood councils. I'm really disappointed in the mayor's office for their presentation today. I'm surprised that they even had guts to submit what they submitted to you. It seems like they want to take the neighborhood councils and this kind of shove us under the rug, put us into a corner, and forget about us. And I think it's unfair. I think CDD could easily support us without us being under their leadership in a lot of ways, and should be able to because they have funds. They have federal funds, and they even, I think, have some city funds, I'm assuming. And they could act as an advocate for us without having us under their leadership. I think there's a lot of people in the coalition of neighborhood councils that support each other, and they're working together to support each other. And I'm new at this, obviously, and I'm new on my neighborhood council. And I've gotten a lot of support just by going to the coalition meetings and talking to people. So I do not support neighborhood count done being taken under the CDD umbrella.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Russell Brown, followed by Terry Ellen Robinson.
Russell Brown, I'm president of Downtown LA Neighborhood Council. I'm speaking for myself, although I've been doing neighborhood councils for 8 years, and we haven't officially voted on this. Obviously, none of us in this room are here to defend the status quo of where we were in the past. And I think we're all very aware that the neighborhood councils have grown and changed, and that structure needs to change quite a bit too. But I'll relate my personal experience. If Dunn had almost 40 employees for neighborhood councils, theoretically that would mean that my neighborhood council had a half-time employee each month, which would be 40 hours a month out of an 80-hour week. I would say we typically access Dunn maybe 2 or 3 hours a month. And what happened to that other 40 hours a month that was sort of our time? I would say the majority of the times, if you're a very good neighborhood council, which I think we are, we had no need for Dunn, and Dunn was sort of invisible. We're flying that plane, and we only needed them for takeoff. But the few times that we did need Dunn was typical bureaucracy of calling up, to figure out 84 ways to get a no, and rarely a way to get a yes. So we definitely need to change this whole mechanism, and I don't have a whole lot of faith that CDD is the way to do it. On the funding mechanism, I'll use this as an example. We got an office donated that was normally $800 a month, that we had a local businessman for $350 a month give us a 500 square foot office, including rent and including internet. It took less time for the city to purchase a $6 million parking lot to be a park, which took 7 months, than it did for us to get our lease approved at a 60% discount in a building that 2 floors of the building is the LA Housing Authority. So when you look at trying to get bills paid, I ran the numbers. We have 5 checks a month. At $3,600 a year, that 8%, that's $60 per check for somebody to sit at a desk to do a check that 100% of the work and the paperwork needs to be delivered to them before they can do it. This is really no different than running an employee with an expense account or an adult child who's at college. You make it really easy. You give them a stored valued card. When the card is empty, you submit receipts and you approve them, and then you put more money in it. You just submit the receipts, and if they don't do it, the money's not reimbursed. If they don't do it for 2 months, the money is lost. Very easy. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Terry Ellen Robinson, and then I don't know if Mr. Wilkinson has returned. He'll have another chance. And then that's all the speakers I have on this item. If anybody else would like to speak, please fill out a card, and then we have a few speakers on for general public comment as well. Ms. Robinson.
Thank you. Well, I'm speaking again, and I'm going to bring up again that City Hall, at the time that this election went in to bring up the neighborhood councils, was totally unable to provide adequate service for the whole city. And it was thought neighborhood councils would be the answer. And the neighborhood councils have been the answer. Now, I belong to Palms Neighborhood Council, which was maligned by Mr. Gross earlier because we didn't have a big attendance. We were promised by the previous clerk of the city, not the current one, that we would have experience in running the elections, which we have done by ourselves in the past, and that we would have outreach. Now, this is tremendously important in Palms because we are mainly a gated apartment community. And it's been extremely difficult to get anybody out of those apartments and into working with. And not only that, it's a very transitory group of people who've lived there. Many are UCLA students, and when they graduate, they're gone. And that's a big part of the population there. We've done tremendous things in spite of the fact it's been the few, and we have gotten some of the word out. Dunn has provided the mailing to all those apartment buildings that were gated so at least they would know about the elections. I don't know if it happened this time. I doubt it. But it has helped somewhat. But I was really looking forward to the outreach that the previous clerk promised to us because I thought at last we're finally going to be able to really get across the message. It never happened. And so we're still the same. We have a lot of problems now that we have to get going. We'll probably be working with some appointments and stuff. But we have done tremendous things for our community. We have not had tremendous support from the city. We have had our agent, and she's been wonderful. She now has taken a quick early retirement, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Mr. Wilkinson back? I don't see him, so that concludes comment on that item. Obviously, as I mentioned before, we're not taking any action on this item yet. We will be returning for further discussion about this at our next meeting. And so that brings up general public comment, and our first speaker in general public comment is Alexia Teran, followed by Russell Brown, who will be followed by Leonard Schaefer.
I was asked by Dunn to come and speak with you, and this is concerning the D-Links rollover money. We had $27,000 in rollover. $14,000 of it was applied to a RICO contract. $13,000 of it was actually budgeted in our 2009 committee budget. In April of 2009, our committees approved it. In May of 2009, our full board approved it. In June of 2009, it was submitted to Dunn. The fiscal year started July 1st of 2009. In the fall, we were told not to access any of the rollover funds until there was an accounting. We turned in the accounting of what it was. Then Dunn came back 2 months later and agreed with our accounting and asked all the neighborhood councils to resubmit their budget with the rollover money in it, which we also did in January. Then in February, we were told the justification needed to be submitted that basically was it was programmed, budgeted, voted on allocated and encumbered under a contract, which we submitted to the city that we did. We got no answers, and then they have retroactively gone back with 20% of our budget at the last 20% of the year, stripped the rollover with no justification explaining to us other than saying if this had been a contract with an outside vendor, we would have honored it, but the contract that we had with the neighborhood council as this part of the budget doesn't fall within those guidelines. And Dunn has actually been pretty helpful, but they said, our hands are tied, go back to the city and figure this out. So we're trying to get clarification why us going through all of these steps and putting it in our budget doesn't abide by any of the rules of what the city council said we needed to do. Now we're getting ready to have elections in 3 weeks. We have no clue what our budget is or how we're supposed to spend this, yet we're told that invoices that we submitted 2 years ago that we just got notice 6 months after the 2 years that they were paid were never paid, and then they want to come and deduct those this month from budgets because we didn't spend rollover funds from 2 years ago. So I'd like some clarification or some way to understand what the city's policy is with rollover and fiscal year allocations, because Dunn doesn't seem to know, and there seems to be no clarity and sanity in any of this either.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is Leonard Schaefer, followed by Noel Weiss.
Yes, good afternoon again. Wanted to hit on 3 small points. One, what neighborhood councils can do together. I was just talking with Lydia Mathers from Van Nuys, and our group, the C group for elections, and another group, we were able to put together through our efforts, our joint efforts, good ads publicizing our neighborhood council elections, where the city, and very cheaply, by the way, where the city didn't have the ability to even put together anything by way of outreach, which is very sad. The next would be, I believe that if there are going to be staff reports that this committee has the ability to view and go over, that it would be good if they were posted on the website, the clerk's website, so those of us who come here could also look through those staff reports. Last but not least, we've heard a lot about an audit. And I've heard about the audit today, I've heard about it before, and I'm very disappointed with the way it's used. I have yet to see a city council or a city department that's been audited where there's been some discrepancies, some problems, to be punished because of that audit. And that audit of neighborhood councils is being used to punish them. Now, I was in law enforcement for 35 years. There were, somewhere 3,000, 4,000, maybe 5,000 people that have been involved in neighborhood councils since their beginning. I'm talking about the boards. And out of those, 6 persons, because it was available, succumbed to the temptation to steal. It's a very, very small percentage. If we turn around and we look at city councils around this county, where members have actually been indicted and prosecuted for stealing and such, it's a much higher percentage. So I think that using this audit as a baseball bat, basically, or as a club to punish us, is really the wrong thing, and it should just be dismissed out of hand.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Noah Weiss, followed by Ed Novy.
Just a quick follow-up to what Mr. Schaefer said. That was not an audit in any way, shape, or form. To use the word audit is to defame what an audit really means. That was a political hatchet job that Wendy Gruhl executed on behalf of the mayor. And more importantly, at some point in time, when the other aspect of the so-called audit was a reference to, I think it was $5.6 million that somehow disappeared. I would like to have at some point an agenda item when Wendy Gruhl is called in here to sit down and to tell you and the rest of the people where that money went. She's supposed to be the controller. She's supposed to find out, and she knows where it went. She was a member of public finance. That money was basically stolen out of the lockbox. And as we know, once that money goes in, it's not supposed to come out. City Council, this is before your time, Mr. Corian, but last year the City Council basically stole that money. Wendy Gruhl needs to basically take account of that and let the people know, or tell the people where it went, if not. Going forward, that money at some point, obviously not this year, maybe not next year, but at some point, that money needs to come back. It's only right. More importantly, and I know this year we didn't do the 2-year budgeting that's really required by the charter, and I technically what they've done in the past is simply to have a budgetary item that says, okay, we're going to pay $140,000 for, in this case, 2011, 2012. That's not right. That's intellectually dishonest. That's kind of in the same genre that we're dealing with this merger, pretending to be one thing when it's really something else. I just want to advocate for the idea that really we do this the right way. We really do budget 2 years in advance, the way that the people who drafted the charter intended, so that we don't have these rollover problems, so that neighborhood councils can plan in advance. This is and make the kind of commitments. It's not that they're going to spend it all at once. Obviously, that can be controlled, but at least they'll know going forward that they can make these commitments, and more importantly, that there isn't political retribution when somehow a particular council member or the mayor or the controller decides that we want to punish neighborhood councils by taking away their funding. So I just want to kind of keep that in the general public dialogue and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ed Novy, followed by Lisa Sarkin.
Yes, I would like to respectfully ask, if possible, can the Education and Neighborhood Committee kind of take the show on the road? Because I realize when I look behind me, the faces you see really aren't the faces of Los Angeles. It's a very, we're very white here today. And I think that, no, you laugh, but it's very true. And I think that...
We're suntanned.
Okay, but the point is taken. I think you can observe that the individuals here usually are the same ones you see on the Saturdays at the Lank meeting or the Valley. It's the same faces. And it would be probably beneficial for not only neighborhood councils, but for your committee to kind of get more input throughout the city than just the same people all the time. And the second thing is I've heard a lot of bashing on Dunn. And I'm not a fan necessarily of Dunn. I've only been in the system for 2 years on a neighborhood council. But I was at Arlita's neighborhood council meeting a couple weeks ago. And that neighborhood council needs Dunn. And Dunn has done an awesome job helping them formulate, elect a new council, and move forward. So as much as we bash them, we need them. We need them to reach out to those neighborhood councils that aren't all the better, Sunland, Tahunga, and West Hills, and Sherman Oaks, and whatever else. It's the councils, the neighborhood councils that aren't functioning so well that really need our help.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Sarkin, followed by Judy Price.
Well, I'm involved as of tomorrow in our third election, and we've had the least amount of support from the city clerk's office than we ever had for any election. There was nothing paid for by them, no mailings, and it's really hard to get information out to businesses, and especially in apartment buildings and condominiums. It's impossible to know their names. We had lots of support from Dunn before on the council, when we had the elections 2 years ago, even more 3 years ago, and even more 4 years ago. So the elections are very important. You don't want the same people on the neighborhood councils all the time doing all the work. But if you can't get any outreach out to the people to sign up, which a lot of neighborhood councils had a lot of trouble getting that done in our section, and there has to be a change in how the elections are handled, and I definitely don't think it should go to the neighborhood councils to do it themselves. If we're lost, well, this is bringing up CDD. If we're lost in CDD, we still won't have any support for the elections. And that's not what it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be out there getting the outreach to people, but we can't just do it ourselves. It's impossible. We need the department to support us, and especially with elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judy Price, followed by Joanne Ivonic Garb.
Lisa said exactly what I was going to say, because it had to do with the elections. And the fact that the city clerk handled elections is still in the ordinance that accompanied the mayor's letter and the revisions that they were making trying to merge it in CDD. I know that this is maybe not the time to deal with it, but the elections will be coming up in 2 years, and it's going to take time to organize them, and it's very important that the city clerk not do the elections. There's been abysmal failure every place that I have known in the city. I mean, speaking for our own neighborhood council, there was absolutely no outreach, which was what the neighborhood councils were promised when the city clerk took over the elections. Dunn did a far better job. We did not ever have problems or issues when it came to getting questions answered or to have the oversight and have the election administrators. It really does have to change, and I think it can't wait that long because 2 years isn't that much time. We all changed our bylaws to accommodate the city clerk 2-year terms. Now there's no overlap unless you have 4-year terms, which is a long time to ask volunteers, particularly new ones, to commit. So all of the neighborhood council board seats are up at every election, and that's not really ideal because you don't have the overlap that does keep the continuity. So I think it should go back to the neighborhood councils and be administered by Dunn. Thank you.
And just on that point, this committee did discuss, and I believe the city council approved our recommendation, if I'm not mistaken, that following this election cycle, the clerk will come back with a comprehensive report about what happened, what didn't happen, and then that policy would be revisited by the council. Our next speaker is Joanne Ivonic Garb, followed by Judith Daniels.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I am the face of West Hills. We are predominantly a bedroom community with one semi-major shopping center with Walmart and Kohl's, and we lost Mervyn's, and another with pavilions in it. So I am the face of West Hills. We have 45,000 residents, and we have 25 very active board members. Now, one thing we did have was that Mr. Brostoff secured the Topanga Police Department's community room, and last Saturday, the board members spent 7 hours in an orientation meeting for the new board members as well as the old board members to go over functions of what every committee does, what every officer does, so that everybody had a clear understanding, especially the new people. And we do have 4 new members, including Mr. Brostoff, that are brand new to the West Hills Neighborhood Council. So that's very good. The elections, well, we've been through the elections. we were the experimental babies, and we won't even go there as to how it was. Although I did talk to our treasurer at the orientation, and she told me that our rollover, we're only getting $9,000 of our rollover, and that's not even including a lot of the things that we already had committed, and we sent in all the paperwork. So the rollover, I don't know where they got the figures to come back and say, okay, well, this is important project, this is an important project, you know, and you can have funding for this and you can have funding for that. I don't know who made that decision, because we as a board made those decisions when we allocated the funds.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judith Daniels. Then I'll give a second call to Alexia Tehran, and and that will be, as of now, our final public speaker, unless there are additional cards. No, if that'll be fine. All right, Ms. Daniels.
I'm Judith Daniels, president of the Chatsworth Neighborhood Council. The fact that I've been sitting at this table twice in the last 30 or so minutes, I guess that proves that it is always the same people who are here. I just wanted to make a comment that was based on something that was said just a couple of minutes ago about the election. A number of people who are in this room know that I waged a very vocal battle against the city clerk herself about the election, and I'm not going to comment about that. I still have hard feelings about it. But one of the issues that we ran up against was my council trying to do outreach. We actually went to the city clerk and said, we want a list of all the people who all the registered voters in Chatsworth, so that we can outreach to them and try to get them to come to our our election, and we were told that yes, the city clerk does have that information. Obviously, they do, and we were told that that information is proprietary and that they could not share that information with us. When I said we're part of the city, it's not exactly. We want this for sending out election information, so it's not exactly like we're going to ask them to contribute money to a political campaign or do something that is outrageous. The city clerk would not share that information, and so doing outreach is almost impossible. Academy Printing or Labeling, whatever their name is, does most of the mailings around the city, but they do not have the names of apartment residents, and a lot of areas cannot get to their stakeholders because the names are not available. And just FYI, our outreach, I know that a lot of councils have spent a large amount of money on outreach, $4,000 or $5,000, maybe even more. The Chatsworth Neighborhood Council voted that we should not spend any money on this past election than we had on any previous election. We had a budget of $2,000, and we decided that under the circumstances that we were getting absolutely no help from anybody in the city, that we were going to try to use as many free ways of reaching our stakeholders as possible. We did virtually all of our outreach by email, e-blasts, and putting flyers around. We had the cost of the flyers, but no other cost. We had about 250 voters, which was on the low side of average for ours. It's, I think, maybe the second or third lowest outturn we've ever had. But we spent on our election a total of, I believe it was $230.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Alexia Teran, followed by Dr. Weissman.
Yes, thank you. My name is Alexia Teran. I'm on the board of the Greater Cypress Island Neighborhood Council. This is my second term. And as a regular, even though the first time I was the outreach chair, and then the second one, the education chair, I always do outreach. I lived in my community for about 44 years, so I know many of the people there, and I just talk to them and try to convince them to participate. Just explain what this is about in simple terms. We have a large percentage of Latino, not a lot of education, so it's difficult to get them to participate. They want someone else to do their work. But I do appreciate that you and Councilman Sine have an open mind of the comments that you were saying earlier. I do appreciate that. Thank you. So you're trying to see both sides of the question, even though the gentleman who represents the mayor didn't have all the answers, but maybe he's young. When we started this so-called experiment, many of us had no idea what we were doing. Some of us and some of the staff of DUN. So it took a while to get going and started. And also, why would so many people in this beautiful city come up with the same ideas and suggestions? Doesn't that tell someone, the mayor and other people, that something needed to be done? And we as volunteers stepped up to the plate and tried to work with them. $45,000 is a small amount to assist us with doing some of the work that we do. And outreach has to be done continuously, at least in a community like mine. Every culture is different. Every community is different. The gentleman who mentioned the Best Buy and all of that, well, I'm glad that they have that. We don't. My community is roughly about 16,000, and we have little tiny businesses, small. And that's about it. So we can't ask them for much, even though some of them do volunteer and donate once in a while. We do what we can with what we have, like in my case. And every chance I have to talk to people to come on board, believe me, I do it. This last time, I was so afraid that we were going to have enough people, but we finally did get 8. And I called them and asked them for advice because I need that sometimes. And I'm glad that I do. And when I mentioned that we only had 8, our board should be 15, and I said, that's barely the quorum. So this gentleman said to me, you know what, Alexia? Yours is better than another, I will not say which one, who really needs a lot of help, they only have 2. And I'm going, that can't be possible. So then I felt a little better, but we have 2 more who came on board yesterday. Thank you. So I'm very happy. And one of them happens to be a ranger. A ranger. Isn't that great? He can be our sergeant, our honor, because sometimes we need that.
One thing. I need to ask you to conclude.
Thank you. Thank you. One more thing, if I may. I have a survey that I take to everyone in my community, and I ask them, what do you want us to do with what we're doing? We heard them. The community said, we want you to appreciate the kids who graduate from school. So we're doing this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Weissman,
Mr.
bringing up
congratulations
the Bell Lab.
on your perseverance here today. Know that it's appreciated, and I believe my colleagues who've spoken to you are greatly appreciative of this.
Thank you.
When you offered the opportunity for public comment, did you see the flurry of cards that came forward? The people in this room, and many of them who we represent, are very anxious to speak to the city and try to tell the city what is bothering us, what we think we'd like to do. You've given us the opportunity to speak, and the word catharsis comes to mind, and I won't take that one step further. However, you now have the opportunity to respond, and if that is what is going to come of this, then we have done something very wonderful today. Respond by engaging us, involving us. We're ready. I used the analogy of the adolescent a little earlier. Adolescents aren't incompetents, trust me, as a physician and as a pediatrician. They are very competent, and they're perhaps a better source of exercise and strength than some of their elders. So I hope that we're thought of as competent people to participate fully in city government. There are several other areas I want to go into very quickly, if I may. Volunteerism is one of the buzz points right now. And I put out a request, many of the people in this room have received it and responded to it, asking if they would be willing to volunteer in this new neighborhood council done involvement and take an active role in actual management. The results, of course, are very early. They're very mixed, but there are enough people who are willing to take that commitment. So I think if you call on us, we may be able to respond to you. One more issue. The final throes of the 2009-2010 budget still leave a great deal to be done. And having just reviewed, and you're going to get a good deal more documentation of the cash flow material to describe what the actual experience has been in comparison to the budget, which is always just a proposal. It's just a wish list. And how closely have we come to it? How far are we from actually achieving it? The last thing is both for you and for anyone who might be left in back of me. Voter lists are available through the county recorder. You simply have to ask for them and pay a certain amount of money for them. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that were allocated to the neighborhood councils, if done before they leave us, spent the money necessary to get the voter lists within the city of Los Angeles? They're categorized by zip code. They could be recategorized and then made useful to every one of our neighborhood councils in terms of our outreach. I hope that that may be helpful to some of the people behind me. Thank you so much for your diligence and your perseverance here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. Thank you all very much for participating in this first discussion of what will be several, as I've mentioned a number of times. I appreciate your being here and look forward to your continuing input and comments on this proposal. And with that, just before 6 o'clock, we are adjourned. Thank you.